truth has surfaced. The silence is broken, and what investigators uncovered changes everything. For weeks, the disappearance of baby Emmanuel Haro has weighed heavy on the community. Flyers taped to street poles, candlelight vigils burning late into the night, neighbors searching fields and alleys with hope still in their hearts. Every corner of Southern California echoed the same desperate question: where is Emmanuel? Hope, fear, and unanswered questions filled the air. Parents prayed, families cried, and the community refused to let Emmanuel's name fade into silence. But now, investigators have confirmed what so many feared. Emmanuel's remains have been discovered. The search for a missing child has ended, and what began as a rescue mission is now a criminal case, one that will test truth, justice, and accountability. This is no longer just about a disappearance. It's about evidence, it's about responsibility, and it's about whether justice will finally be served for Emmanuel. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to subscribe, share, and stand with us. Together, we can ensure that Emmanuel's story is not forgotten, and that justice is not silenced. It began like so many missing child cases do, with urgency, fear, and a community determined to help. When baby Emmanuel was first reported missing, authorities treated it as a rescue mission. Time was critical. Every second mattered. Flyers were printed and taped to storefronts and telephone poles. Emmanuel's tiny face stared back at passers-by, a reminder that somewhere a child was waiting to be found. Neighborhoods mobilized. Volunteers walked streets, alleys, and open fields. Search parties gathered at dawn and pushed deep into the night. Families who had never met Emmanuel felt the weight of his absence. Strangers held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would be found safe. Candlelight vigils soon became a nightly ritual. Parents stood shoulder to shoulder with grandparents. Children held candles alongside neighbors. Their prayers rose into the night sky. Bring Emmanuel home. The community refused to let hope die, and for a while that hope was strong enough to keep everyone moving forward. But even in those early days, investigators began noticing troubling signs, details that didn't quite fit, accounts that left more questions than answers. At first, those inconsistencies seemed small, easy to dismiss as the noise of a chaotic, emotional search. But as the hours turned into days, those cracks in the story grew larger, and soon they would change everything about the case. At first, Jake and Rebecca Haro appeared to be devastated parents, pleading for answers, asking for help, and telling their version of events. But as investigators listened closer, something wasn't right. Their timelines didn't align. Rebecca claimed one sequence of events, while Jake told another. The hours surrounding Emmanuel's disappearance were blurry, vague, and inconsistent. Detectives are trained to catch these details, and in this case, every inconsistency was a red flag. Neighbors began speaking up. Some recalled not seeing Emmanuel for days before he was reported missing. Others noted strange behavior from the couple, arguments, closed blinds, unusual activity in the home. Each testimony chipped away at the image of grieving parents. Then came the contradictions in their official reports. Records showed gaps that couldn't be explained. Where had Emmanuel truly been in those final days? Why did Jake and Rebecca struggle to recall simple facts any loving parent would know? The more detectives pressed, the more the cracks widened. What began as small inconsistencies grew into glaring contradictions. And then, an even more troubling discovery surfaced. This was not Jake Haro's first encounter with the justice system. In 2023, just a year before Emmanuel's disappearance, Jake had faced a child-related conviction. Instead of serving prison time, he was given probation, a decision that would now come under intense scrutiny. For investigators, this history changed the way they viewed the case. For the community, it raised painful questions. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Was Emmanuel failed not only by his parents, but also by a system that had already ignored warning signs? The hopeful search for Emmanuel was shifting into something darker. The image of a lost child in need of rescue was replaced by a chilling possibility that the very people who were supposed to protect him might instead be responsible for his fate. And with each passing day, as pressure mounted and scrutiny deepened, investigators knew they were heading toward a breaking point. A moment when hope would collide with evidence. A moment when truth could no longer be hidden. The turning point came swiftly. As detectives gathered evidence and stacked contradictions, the weight of suspicion could no longer be ignored. The parents, Jake and Rebecca Haro, were no longer just witnesses in their child's disappearance. They were now prime suspects. The community that had once rallied behind them began to shift as well. Whispers spread. Could Emmanuel's parents really be involved? For neighbors who had lit candles and prayed at vigils, the thought was almost unbearable. But the facts left little room for denial. Then came the breaking news: Jake and Rebecca were arrested. The charges, filing a false police report and other serious allegations connected to Emmanuel's disappearance. It was the first official acknowledgement that investigators believed the parents knew more than they had admitted. Prosecutors didn't hold back. They requested bail be set at $1 million each, a figure that spoke louder than words. This wasn't just about negligence. This was about accountability at the highest level. Court documents painted a grim picture. Prosecutors argued that Jake and Rebecca had deliberately misled authorities, wasting precious time and resources during those first critical hours when Emmanuel might have still been alive. To investigators, this wasn't just deception. It was obstruction, an attempt to bury the truth beneath confusion and lies. And for those who had followed Emmanuel's story from the beginning, the arrests were shocking but not entirely surprising. The cracks had been visible. The contradictions undeniable. The weight of their silence had already said more than words ever could. But the haunting part, this was not the first time Jake Haro's name had been linked to troubling allegations. In 2023, he had faced a child-related conviction. Instead of prison time, he was granted probation. That decision, once seen as leniency, now stood as a painful reminder of what can happen when the system looks the other way. People began to ask, was this tragedy preventable? If stronger action had been taken against Jake earlier, would Emmanuel still be alive? Those questions hung heavy, casting a shadow not just over the family, but over the justice system itself. For detectives, the arrests marked progress. For the community, they marked betrayal. Parents weren't supposed to harm their children. Mothers and fathers weren't supposed to be the suspects. But here they were, behind bars, awaiting trial, while the most haunting question of all still lingered in the air. Where was Emmanuel? The arrests brought headlines. They brought answers. But they didn't bring closure. Because until Emmanuel was found, the case was still shrouded in darkness, and the search for truth was far from over. The case reached its most devastating moment when investigators confirmed what so many feared, but hoped would never be true. Baby Emmanuel's remains had been found. The search that began with desperate hope, flyers on telephone poles and candlelight vigils, ended not with a rescue but with heartbreak. The story was no longer about finding a missing child. It was now about evidence, accountability, and whether justice would finally be served. But here's where investigators made a deliberate choice. They refused to disclose the exact location of where Emmanuel's remains were discovered. To some, that silence seemed cold, almost cruel, but in reality it was strategy. In cases like this, evidence is fragile. A single footprint, a trace of soil, even the way a body is positioned, all of it can determine the strength of a case in court. Too much public exposure could destroy that evidence. The media could swarm, curiosity seekers could trample a crime scene, and so, investigators chose silence not to withhold the truth, but to protect it. Behind the scenes, the search for Emmanuel had been meticulous. Jake Haro himself was escorted into the field, shackled in a prison jumpsuit, deputies surrounding him step by step. Investigators watched his every move, hoping he might lead them to answers he had been unwilling to give in words. Cadaver dogs were deployed, trained to detect scents invisible to human senses. Overhead, drones scanned the terrain from above. On the ground, forensic teams moved slowly and deliberately, documenting every angle, every trace, every possible fragment. Nothing was rushed, nothing was left to chance. And then confirmation: Emmanuel's remains were located. For the community, the discovery was crushing. Hope for a safe return was gone. Vigils turned from prayers of rescue into prayers of mourning. Families who had once whispered, "Bring Emmanuel home," now cried out for justice. For investigators, the discovery shifted everything. This was no longer just a case of suspicion. They now had evidence that would carry weight in the courtroom. But even here, silence lingered. Officials gave only careful confirmations, speaking in phrases like credible lead and strong indication. They revealed nothing more than what was absolutely necessary. To the public, those words felt like half-truths. To investigators, they were shields protecting the integrity of the case from being compromised. It was a chilling moment. Emmanuel's life had ended too soon, his story reduced to fragments of evidence and court filings. But in that silence, there was also direction. Investigators were closer than ever to the full truth. And as the news broke, the community realized this was no longer just about a child gone missing. It was about responsibility, justice, and whether the truth, hidden for so long, would finally be brought into the light. As investigators worked in silence, the community spoke louder than ever. In Beushausen, candlelight vigils became a nightly ritual. Parents, grandparents, neighbors, and children gathered under the night sky, their candles glowing like stars against the darkness. Some prayed softly. Others sang hymns. Many just stood in silence, holding Emmanuel's memory close to their hearts. For them, Emmanuel was more than a headline. He was more than a case number in the hands of detectives. He represented every child who deserves to be safe. Every child who deserves love, protection, and a chance to grow. His name became a symbol, a reminder that no child should ever be overlooked, no warning sign ignored, no voice unheard. Mothers clutched their children tighter as they prayed. Fathers stood quietly, their faces lined with grief and determination. Strangers embraced one another, united by loss and a common plea for justice. These vigils were not only about mourning, they were about resolve. Each candle lifted into the night was a message to the world. We will not forget Emmanuel. We will not be silent. We will demand answers. We will demand justice. The community had carried Emmanuel's story from the very first flyer, and now, as the truth began to emerge, they carried it with even greater strength. Because for them, justice wasn't just for Emmanuel. It was for every child who had ever been failed, every warning that had ever been ignored, and every life cut short by neglect or violence. And tomorrow, when Jake and Rebecca step into the courtroom, the voices of that community will echo louder than ever. Their candles may burn in the night, but their message is clear: justice for Emmanuel. The courtroom, a place where truth is tested, stories collide, and justice is weighed one piece of evidence at a time. For Jake and Rebecca Haro, this is where their future and Emmanuel's legacy will be decided. Their bail, set at $1 million each, was the first sign that prosecutors mean business. This isn't a case the court is taking lightly. Prosecutors have spent weeks, even months, building their case. Every contradiction in the parent's story, every neighbor's testimony, every forensic discovery from the field, all of it has been documented, cataloged, and prepared to withstand the toughest scrutiny. But trials are not just about evidence. They are about strategy. Prosecutors will have to decide, what do they reveal first, which documents, photographs, or testimonies will make the greatest impact. Do they lead with the contradictions in the parents' timeline, or do they begin with the haunting discovery of Emmanuel's remains? Piece by piece, they will lay the groundwork, careful not to rush, careful not to overplay their hand. Because in a courtroom, even the truth must be proven. And then there is the defense. Their challenge, to explain the unexplainable. To justify the gaps in time, the inconsistencies in testimony, the shadows in the Haro's past. How do you argue against the weight of evidence when it points directly back at the very people who claim to be victims themselves? The stakes could not be higher. For the prosecution, this case is about more than Emmanuel. It is about accountability, about showing that no one, not even parents, can escape justice if they harm a child. For the defense, it is about survival, about casting doubt where doubt seems impossible. And for the community, the courtroom battle is about truth. Will the voices of investigators, neighbors, and prosecutors be louder than the silence and deception that have surrounded this case from the beginning? Tomorrow, when those doors open, the silence begins to break. The evidence will speak. And Emmanuel's story, piece by painful piece, will finally be told under oath. The question now is this: will justice listen? Emmanuel's story is heartbreaking, but it is also revealing. This case is not just about one child, one family, or one courtroom battle. It's about the cracks in the system that allowed this tragedy to happen. Jaylynn Haro had already faced a child-related conviction in 2023. Instead of prison time, he was given probation. That decision, once dismissed as a lenient sentence, now echoes like a haunting warning. If stronger action had been taken then, could Emmanuel still be alive today? This is why Emmanuel's case matters. Because it forces us to ask difficult questions. About the justice system. About accountability. About the responsibility we all share to protect children who cannot protect themselves. For investigators, Emmanuel's remains are now evidence. For prosecutors, his case is a fight for truth. But for the community, Emmanuel is more than that. He is a reminder that every child deserves safety, love, and a chance at life. His short story demands that we learn, that we act, and that we never ignore the warning signs again. And so tomorrow, when the courtroom doors open, it will not just be Jake and Rebecca on trial. It will be a test of accountability. A test of whether justice can rise above silence, deception, and failure. But here's the truth: justice is not automatic. It doesn't just happen, it requires people who refuse to stay silent. It requires voices, loud, united, and relentless. That's where you come in. If you believe Emmanuel's story deserves to be told, if you believe justice must be louder than silence, then stand with us. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, share where you're watching from, and most importantly, share Emmanuel's story so the world cannot look away. Our goal is to grow this community from 1,000 to 2,000, then 3, then 5,000 strong. Because every comment, every share, every voice raised is one more demand for accountability. Emmanuel never had the chance to grow up, to live, to dream. But his name can live on as a call for justice, a reminder that silence is never an option. Tomorrow the court doors open. Tomorrow evidence begins to speak. And tomorrow we will not stay silent. We will be heard. Justice for Emmanuel.